Hey guys, Miata Man here. Today we're going to show you how to replace the alternator belt and the power steering belt on a Mazda Miata. This one here that we have is a 1.6 liter. It's 92, and so this will be exactly the same for 90 to 93 and very similar for 94 all the way up to 05. So what I want to just show you first is some of the things that we're going to have to undo to get things off. We're going to have to loosen this bolt here. We're going to have to loosen this bolt and this nut, and then we're going to have to back this one off so that we can move this belt. Now the other thing we'll have to do is take off this whole air assembly here, and that will give us access to the alternator, which is right behind here, right in there. So the problem with this car is that it sat for quite a while. It sat for, I think, about 5 years. So we've got a little bit of rust on the pulley here. Doesn't seem too bad, but what'll happen sometimes is, you know, as things get old, the belts will crack. You can see all the cracks in this belt right here. And you can, if I can get in there, just a second here. You can see how loose that belt is. That's very loose. So we've also got a very cracked power steering belt, and that one's not as loose. That's pretty tight still, but it's the alternator that's usually the problem. So that creates quite a bit of squealing, and you can also see where, see all that black dust in here? That's partially from that belt wearing down. And you can see it on that nut right there. It looks like oil deposits, but that's actually rubber dust on that one right in the center of the screen there. So that's why we're doing the belts today. You know, I could get away with just tightening them if they were in better condition, but that alternator belt's toast. So we are going to replace those today. And let's begin. I'm going to set you up on the tripod, and then we'll get into this. Close as we can to the action here, and I'll explain it as I go here. So we got it all dialed in. There's the cat. Okay, all right, so now we are ready to begin. So here we go. So I've got the tools laid out already here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this air intake here, and that is a 10 millimeter nut, or even a Phillips as well. There's a screw head in there. I always like to use the socket though, because that way you don't strip that head if it's too tight. So you're gonna loosen that guy off, loosen it off on the mass airflow sensor end here too. Now there's a 10 millimeter nut or cap screw or bolt right here as well. And that's what actually holds this onto a bracket so that it doesn't move around. A lot of times you'll see that that bolt, which I'm going to remove here, it's this guy. A lot of times that's either missing or it's broken off because it gets rusty. So we'll put some never sees on this afterwards when we put it back in. Okay, so now that is loose. So there's the three main points of attachment. Then you've got this one here, which I'll actually take off down here and here. So now slide that off. You may have to work this a little bit to get it to come up and out. There we go. Now I should be able to just slide this off. Now be careful of this rad hose when you're taking this off, because you don't want to poke a hole in it. So make sure that this clamp isn't poking in against here. So take that off, And then we can lay this down. Get it out of the way, being careful not to poke it into the radiator. Yeah, and if you want a little bit more room, you can actually split this in half. There's a Phillips screw head on this clamp here. And if you back that right off, remove that part. So let's put this on the ground. Now we've only got this one piece to contend with. So that makes our life a lot easier to get in here and do stuff. So now that I've done that, I'm going to bring you in for a closer look, show you what we just did. So you can see on top of that alternator, all of that rubber that's been deposited. And a lot of the reason for that is because the belt's really old and crusty. It's also very loose. Let's bring in this side. Like the amount of deflection of this belt is crazy. I can almost pull that belt right off. But you can see all of that stuff. It's all rubber. It's all rubber dust on there. So we'll brush that off a bit. But yeah, so that is definitely time to get in there and do this job. Now, that 10mm bolt I was telling you about that's often missing and often broken off goes right there. That's the bracket that holds the bolt that goes through here. Okay, and that's what holds this firm against the car. So that's what that is there. Now this here, I like to peel this part off and actually have it seated properly in here. I'll do that afterwards, but it's imperative that you get a good seal when you're all done, and that all of these little teeth and these tangs go in between right here where I have it spread. Sometimes you see these things and they're not on properly. So that's a little tip for you. So now, the other thing I want to show you now that we're in here is these slots here. They exist for a reason. And part of that reason is when you're tightening all this back up afterwards, you need to get a socket through here to grab the bolt head that corresponds with that post that's sticking out the back there. So that bolt terminates just behind here. I can see it down in the bottom corner there. It's not great because it won't focus, but right there. So if you have this in the correct position, which is the slot here and here instead, so if that's rotated, you'll be able to get to that bolt no problem at all. Just something to keep in mind when you're doing this job. Okay, and it's a good thing we noticed the belts on this because they're ready to break. You can really see it on the top of this one here. Okay guys, so that there is step one of the alternator and power steering belt replacement. So now that we've got those things apart, we can continue with step two. So tune in for the second video of this series. It's coming right up.